What's up, gamers? Welcome back to 180 MTG. My name is Ryan Overturf, and today I'm going to be talking about modular cubes. Specifically, I'm going to get to this. I'm going to be talking about how my spooky cube today is a modular cube. That is, it's two 180 card Tubert environments for 2 or 4 players that can be shuffled together for one 360 card cube to be drafted by 8 players. But that's not the only way to do modular cubes. It's the way that I have found satisfaction and success in curating environments. But before I dive into the modular environment of Spooky Cube, let's talk a little bit about modular cubes in general. What does that mean? The concept for a modular cube is that you have individual selections of cards, modules, if you will, and they could be interchanged, shuffled together, separated to be drafted in any combination so that you have a cube where it's not just a static card list. It's not, here's 540 cards, this is my cube. It's, here's a bunch of different pockets of cards, and we can shuffle them together, and then we cube that way. I was first introduced to the concept of modular cubes by my friend Mike. One week I showed up for cube night, and he just had a bunch of cards from his cube with these letter stamps. I remember specifically this Birds of Paradise that had the letter A in black ink stamped onto the card, and I asked, hey, what's going on with this? And he told me that our friend Kevin had kind of been egging him on to develop a modular cube. So there would just be interchangeable parts and stacks of cards you could shuffle together and, filter that out and try to figure out what that looks like and to turn that into a cube. And I remember thinking it was so cool. Just seeing that Birds of Paradise with the A, that's a memory that's kind of burned into my brain. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, how does that work? Like, how do you design a module? What exactly is that? How many cards is that? And importantly, Mike, as I recall, never actually assembled a modular cube. He had just started working on it because it sounded really interesting. But it's a lot of work, both in terms of theory crafting, what is this, how do I make it, and then the logistical aspect. I think that he started stamping cards because he thought it would give him some motivation to continue, and then it just kind of fell off, even though there was a lot of excitement about the concept. And I remember I started trying to work on it. I had a bunch of separate files on my old Cube Tutor page, RIP Cube Tutor, where I was just trying to come up with different ideas for modules and how this might work. I remember I kind of latched on to the idea that 45 card modules kind of made sense. You have 45 cards per player for any kind of draft size, 180 is the number of cards I use for 4-player cubes. 360 is the number for 8. It's just because it's cleanly divisible by 45. And so I would build these 45 card stacks with some kind of theme. Maybe they'd be a specific color. I would have like mono blue, and the theme would be kind of blue devotion. You could do like color pairs, or something I found more satisfying than pairs was doing like a 3-color set, a wedge or a shard. So if you have this, then you can do Jund, where 3-color is a little bit harder to explore in other designs, and getting to that space where maybe you can do something a little bit more unique here. And you could have modules that focus on some kind of mechanic. You could do like a Delirium module, so you would have things like Ishkana Graph Widow, like payoffs for Delirium, plus cards that were very good at putting multiple card types in your graveyard, stuff like Malevolent Rumble. And I thought it was really interesting, but that's an important word. If you spend much time around game designers, I'm sure you've heard the word interesting used as opposed to fun. When the word interesting is used in game design, it tends to mean, okay, that is something that you can think about. There's complexity, there's things for your brain to chew on, but then you're going to use the word fun if you actually want to do it. So I had this thing that I was working on, and I thought it was really interesting. It was really crunchy. Oh, how does this work? What does this look like? But then actually putting it together seems so cumbersome, and the juice did not at all seem worth the squeeze. There was no point where I was like, oh yeah, we're going to do this, and it's going to be really fun to play. I was always thinking more along the lines of, how does this work? Can this work? And I never got to a point where I was like, all right, this is it. Let's play it. This is going to be a great time. It was more like, I think that this works, and I'm spending like a lot of time thinking about it, so that's kind of fun. But it never seemed like something I really wanted to do in practice. It gets kind of chaotic because there's a lot of questions that you end up asking yourself working on something like this. If you're making these 45 card packets, all right, how do we do mana fixing lands? Should you have a specific packet, like one of your modules is just 45 mana fixing lands? Do you want to do something that's just like, okay, here's a base 90 cards, 180 cards. These ones are always locked in, and then you can choose 45 to add. I like the idea of every player choosing like a 45 card model to add to the cube, but it was all just stuff that I think to actually get a play experience that was as or more satisfying than just drafting a normal cube, it didn't pass the sniff test. It was fun to think about. It was very interesting, but I was never convinced just in terms of abstractly taking something that's never played. Here's 45 cards. We're going to shuffle it together with different modules of 45 cards. How does that really work? Like it's too ethereal. There was nothing really approachable. There was nothing I could really grab onto. It was just okay. Here's some ideas. They seem consistent. They seem like they might work. And the more time I spent on this, I understood why Mike had just some cards with letter stamps. You can only get so far before you decide, all right, I would rather just be playing games. Actually, just playing games sounds fun. Let's set this interesting thought exercise to the side. So I never really got anywhere with that 45 card module kind of idea. But fast forward a few years, I build the original recipe Tubert. I kind of identify that there's a lot of space to explore when it comes to 180 card cubes. I build the Tempo Tubert, and then as soon as I have two 180 card cubes, very quickly, kind of everybody gets this idea. Once you have more than one Tubert, you start thinking, if we wanted to play with 8 players, we could just shuffle two of these together. We could take the original recipe Tubert and the Tempo Tubert, shuffle them up, you got 360 cards. And I never actually did that. I want to clarify. It's something that it wouldn't be that hard to do. I could do it. We just never really had a group of 8 where we were signing up to do that kind of thing. So I can't really speak to how that would play. I have some reservations about it because these cubes have pretty disparate designs. There's cards that'll play well together. I think that if you actually were to shuffle those two cubes together, you would find a bunch of decks with very low mana curves. I think that it would kind of wash out the importance of the 6-drop cycle in the original recipe Tubert. Things would be a lot more focused on just spells being cheap and efficient. So I don't think that that would be a great environment. I think that that kind of thing would play better if the two cubes were designed to actually play together. But that's where things get interesting. Because once you're thinking about shuffling together the cubes that are independently designed, you start thinking, well, can I design cubes to actually be played together? So I started working on that. I, at one point, had a 180 card cube design that was just called the Modular Tubert. It was just designed to actually supplement the original recipe Tubert. And that was actually pretty fun. And importantly, it solved a problem that I was having just with those 45 card modules. I was not just designing 180 cards just as a stack that would never be played independently. I was looking at it through the lens of, okay, I want some synergies and some themes. I want to build a second cube. We can play this 180 card stack with 2 or 4, and then it'll supplement the original recipe Tubert when we want to play with 8. And there were some aspects of that I really liked, and it was not the only modular design that I built kind of from the ground up from that premise of individual 180 card environments. I spent a lot of time working on what I referred to as the time capsule cube. This was 6 180 card cubes, each dedicated to a different era in Magic's history, so I went out of my way to get printings that existed at the time. So the first module would have been the early days of Magic. It went through, I think I ended up going a sizable chunk of years for this one, just because early designs, the actual hits were few and far between, or when it came to the good cards, they tended to be just like historical power outliers. And I like the idea of things being as kind of flat as they can be. So I wanted each individual module to shine. The idea is you want to shuffle these together and have them play together and have the cards from both of them matter. Remember, that was kind of the issue I was having. Just if I wanted to shuffle together my first two two-birds, the original recipe two-bird and the tempo two-bird, I thought that the tempo two-bird would kind of outshine the original recipe two-bird. When one side is just more efficient or more powerful in some way, it becomes less appealing, less charming to me as a modular experience. So I went through like, I think 97 or 98, like a good chunk of years. It might have actually been like 2000. It might have been a very long stretch of years. Anyway, it's not a project I keep up with anymore. There's definitely some issues with it where I think it's really cool conceptually. It was a really fun look through the history of Magic. It played less fun, and it was also this kind of thing where I find as a cube curator, part of the problem that I never got to with those 45 card modules is if I show up with that and I say, hey, we're all going to pick one of these and shuffle them together, similar to what I was talking about last week, just in the introduction to Spooky Cube, there's going to be some decision paralysis on that. If I'm spending all this time and I build all these different 45 card modules, I'm going to have a really good idea of what they all look like. If I show up with like 20 of these things and I say, hey, pick one of these, we're going to shuffle them together, and you have no idea what's in any of them or how it might impact the play environment, maybe you just don't care that much, or maybe you're just really interested in having a good time, you'll do whatever, then sure, you'll just pick one and we should have a fun time as long as we all agree, hey, this is going to be fun, it's going to be kind of chaotic. But some people are going to think, oh god, which one of these do I choose and why? It can be really overwhelming. Any kind of hidden information like that where you make a decision and you can tell it's going to have probably a very dramatic impact on the environment. If I show up with like these 680 card cubes for the time capsule cube and say we're going to pick 2 or even 3 of them to shuffle together, well, why would we do one or the other? It just kind of seemed like there was a lot going on. I wouldn't say it's a non-starter to have a bunch of different options to shuffle together, but I think that if you're going to do that, you need something with more resonance. If I just say, hey, these are cards from 2001 to 2003, that might speak to you, but it also might mean little or nothing to you. A different idea that I had, this would be really cumbersome. I never have started working on this, but it's a really cool idea conceptually. Part of the reason I've never done this is I have more interest, like I was talking about last week, in pulling cards from the entire history of Magic to designing a cube than doing something like a set cube, where you only use cards from one set or one block. But if you were the type that was really interested in those set or block cube designs, an idea that I find really appealing that would just be, again, a ton of work, but would be awesome to see on a shelf, would be really cool to play. I don't know how it would actually play, but conceptually it's very interesting, would be to design a cube for every block in the history of Magic, or maybe even just doing your favorite blocks. So you would have a 180 card cube for Time Spiral block. You would have a 180 card cube for Onslaught block, for Kamigawa block, for Invasion block. And those kind of are louder about what they are. If I say, hey, here's cards from 2003 to 2005, you might be able to, off the top of your head, say, oh, yeah, sick. I love Mirrodin and Ravnica. But if the box just says Ravnica, that communicates something immediately that's more loudly resonant. Again, this would involve a lot of curation, a lot of logistical effort to get this many cards, to design this many environments. But just in my head, I picture just this shelf that has, all right, here's the Invasion block, here's Tempest block, here's Ravnica block. And it seems really cool to me. I typically enjoy a power level that's higher than what that kind of thing would be. I already do design a lot of cubes. This would be just a ton of real estate. So it's something that I don't think I'm ever going to design. I want to put it out into the world because somebody else, I think this is a really cool idea. And I love the idea of somebody else taking the ball and running with it on that. So if you like that idea, it's yours. And then that consistent through line of what I find appealing, what gets me motivated to actually construct a modular cube is that breakdown where you have multiple independent environments where you can actually draft the different modules. And I did think that at least a couple of those time capsule cube modules were pretty fun. The one that had the original Ravnica block really stood out to me, and some of that is just that Ravnica was excellent. But even then, I felt a little bit constrained, like having that design principle where you're just looking at a small number of sets, where it's just, okay, this time period. I like playing with the entire history of Magic, and then that cube, to the extent that there was stuff that was fun and that I liked, it was stuff that I had already been cubing with in similar environments. There was aspects of that cube that I just enjoyed more in the original Recipe Tubert, that I just enjoyed more in the Tempo Tubert. And so ultimately, I ended up deconstructing the time capsule cube. It's not anything that I support anymore. It was a cool and a fun project to work on, but it just is not exactly in the space that I really enjoy. It did demonstrate that a design like that can really work, and there's something that I haven't touched on yet. When it comes to modular cubes, I am a huge proponent of singleton when it comes to my cube designs, but modular cubes, they do invite you to break singleton in just terms of ease of construction. If you have two modules that both want a lightning bolt, I think it's kind of fun to puzzle which one wants it more and to just have a singleton lightning bolt in the full cube environment. But there is some charm and also just ease of construction to just putting the lightning bolt in both, specifically with the time capsule cube, or if you were going to run with that Tubert for every block in Magic history. There's an aesthetic reason to do multiples to break singleton that actually just is really satisfying. If you're going to have a bunch of modules that all have an aesthetic focus, I mean, all cards from Ravnica, for me it'd be important to have just cards specifically that were printed in that block. I would want the Ravnica printings of everything. I would want the Guild Pack printings of all the Guild Pack cards. And if you follow that aesthetic guideline, it's really satisfying to take a card that has been reprinted and then to have the different printings be the printing for that block. The card Opt, for example, has been reprinted a bunch of times. So if you have the Invasion Tubert and that has the Invasion printing of Opt, and you shuffle it together with Dominaria, I believe Dominaria was when Opt was reprinted and that officially brought it into Pioneer, back into Standard. So it was a big deal. I remember when Opt was printed there, and it's really cool to then have the Dominaria printing in the Dominaria Tubert, and then you shuffle those modules together. And so you've broken singleton, but you can tell that these are different cards. The aesthetics of that are going to loudly say, okay, this is Opt from Invasion, and we have this Opt in Dominaria, and there's this historical aspect that by curating with those aesthetics in mind, it doesn't really feel like the same card. When you see them side by side, when you see them in packs drafting, it's not this pack has two Opts. It's this pack has the Invasion Opt and the Dominaria Opt, and there's different historical significance of them. And I'm going to grant two things here. I care about singleton with regard to the artistry of cube curation more than a lot of people. It's totally fine if your own designs that you don't abide by singleton. That's a personal preference thing. I'm a big proponent of it, but that's not what today's podcast is about. And then also, I know that I am going to nerd out about the history of the game and care about the specific printings a lot more than other players. Maybe what I'm saying right now doesn't appeal to you at all. Maybe that doesn't sound very interesting or very fun. But if you do care about this stuff, I do think that there is a lot of ground to cover there and to explore with regard to both your own technical and aesthetic designs, that there's these layers going on with the space of modular cubes where there's so much that you can do in exploring and designing these environments. And that aesthetic curation that actually segues really nicely into a logistical point about maintaining this kind of cubes. If you have all cards from a certain era or a certain block and you shuffle them together with all cards from a different era or different block, it's then going to be really easy to separate the cards out when you're done drafting. That's something that you're going to need to do. Remember, I was talking about those letter stamps on Mike's cards when he was first working on this. You need to be able to separate the cards out after the draft because the whole idea is that it's modular. They can be interchanged. It's not just one cube. if every card is from Ravnica and every card is from Invasion in your two different modules, it's really easy to just eyeball those and separate those out. And maybe if you're very familiar with whatever your premise is for your different modules, you'll be able to do this at a glance. But for me, for my different modular cubes, what I had been doing, I use an inner sleeve and then I just use a different colored Sharpie and I'll write a different letter to denote which module things came from. For the time capsule cube, that was actually just really easy. Everything was single sleeved and every card was printed in a different era. Really easy to separate things out at the end. The lines blurred a little bit when it came to two cubes that were in back-to-back eras. Like the first two modules, I kind of would forget, all right, which set is the actual cutoff here? Is it Mirrodin or what's going on? But if you do something really loud, like here's a module that is pre-modern, here is a module that is modern, like 8th edition onward, then the card frames is going to be different on every card. So that'll be really easy to just eyeball and separate things out. So even if you don't necessarily care about the history or those aesthetics of different printings, using different printings, that is something that will at least logistically make the setup and takedown of the modular environment a little bit easier. And then if you have some time and you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself when you don't have just those design aesthetic principles, inner sleeve, some kind of marking. Importantly, when it comes to stamp ink, some of that is going to leave a permanent mark on your inner sleeve, and some of it is just going to wipe right off, just the way that ink and plastic works. I'm not a scientist. I don't really know too much about this. I don't know what you look for. I can tell you for sure, if you write with a Sharpie on a magic card sleeve, it's going to leave a permanent mark, and it's not that expensive to get different colored Sharpies. That's what I use. But just to warn you, if you want to use any other kind of ink, it might not work. So you should know that the kind of ink you're using on the kind of plastic that you are marking will actually leave a permanent mark. That's going to be important. Stickers work. I think stickers are kind of cool and fun. You, of course, would have to buy enough stickers. You want something small enough that it won't obscure what's on the card. And this is more minor. They could have like an issue with thickness in the sleeves, but everything should be pretty uniform. I don't know if it might impact how shuffling works. I've never used stickers, but other people use stickers, so that's an avenue you could go down as well. And now it's finally time to talk about converting the Spooky Cube into a modular cube. This was my first modular design that I would consider a big success. And a lot of that was that I started with Spooky Cube was a 360 card cube, and I knew that it played really well and was fun at 360 cards, and so I just had to break it into two 180 card environments. Simple, right? Well, not really. You can't just do like a draft, like a schoolyard pick, and just go, all right, you're going to go in Module A, and you're going to go in Module B. There's something pretty important with Spooky Cube that actually makes it work as a modular cube, and that is that it had these two larger themes that could operate fully independently. So the Spooky Cube now, it's broken up into the Humans module and the Monster module, and that denotes two significant themes. One is human typal, the other is graveyard matters. And even then, there's more going on than just saying, all right, you're a human, you go in the human module, you're a monster, you go in the monster module, you're a discard matter cards, you go over here. Like, it's not realistic to say, hey, I have a 360 card cube, I could break that into two 180 card tuberts. You could, and depending on what your standards are for play and what you value and care about, or maybe by some coincidence you have a design that just works super well and cleanly for this, maybe. I won't fully discount it, but for me, it definitely took more work than that. It's not just as simple as separating out your 360 cards. I ended up actually changing a lot of cards when I converted this into a modular cube. Just some stuff in terms of quality of life, getting the numbers right for a good breakdown of color distribution, that kind of thing. For example, I had 50 mana-fixing lands in the 360 card Spooky Cube. I have found in practice that I really like to have close to 30 mana-fixing lands in my 180 card environments. And once I broke this into two cubes, I decided that the best course of action would be to add another cycle of mana-fixing lands just to get 30 mana-fixing lands in both modules. and having 60 total in a 360 card environment, it's going to lead to very good mana. That's something that I kind of want to do anyway. So you end up changing cards on those lines, and then also when it comes to maintaining a 180 card cube, I wanted both of these modules, the monster module and the human module, to really come into their own as their own environments. It wasn't just, okay, here's the humans that are part of the bigger spooky cube, and you shuffle them together because this is a 360 card cube. I wanted to have the human module to really be about something. And so I didn't just take the humans I already had in the cube. I took the ones that I had that I really liked, that I considered non-negotiable, I wanted to be in the environment. And again, some of the humans do end up in the monster module. We'll come back to that. But I laid out all the cards that I really wanted to keep here, and then I really do think about these cubes first as their independent modules. I want you to be able to play these with 2 or 4 in a really satisfying way on their own. And that's important largely because I'm just going to be real. It's a lot more difficult to get 8 people together to draft than it is to get 1 friend or even 3 friends together. Your mileage may vary, your preferences may vary, but for me, I definitely am focusing first on satisfying 180 card environments and then making sure that they also work for the 360 card cube. And if both cubes play well on their own, then there's a reasonable chance that they are going to just play well together. You have 2 fun things, you shuffle them together. I think that it would be fine, like I've been saying, to just shuffle any 2 180 card cubes together, but it can be better or worse. As a reminder, the next 2 weeks I'm going to be taking a closer look at both of those modules, first the human module and then the monster module, so I'll get into more of the details of stuff that changed and specific care that was given to those individual 180 card cubes, where this week I'm talking a little bit more about the full 360 card cube and how you make the modular thing kind of work. And one thing that's really important to me when I was talking about not all the humans go in the human module, the reason that Spooky Cube really works as a modular cube, it's not just that there are these 2 big themes. If you just take 2 themes and you want to make a modular cube, you can do it, but you're going to encounter friction if there's no overlap in your themes. For example, this is something I talked to Ryan Sachs a decent amount back when we were working on the 540 together. He had really liked my Tempo Tubert, something that he worked on as well, and he liked the idea of the modular cubes too. He had worked on something that he called the Dirtle Tubert, that was sort of a foil to the Tempo Tubert. As I recall, it's something that had a little bit heavier mana curve, was a little bit more designed to be controlling, and you could just shuffle 2 cubes together like that are maybe a little bit more opposed. I don't know where he ended up landing on that design, but I can speak to why I like something a little bit different. When it comes to those cubes, you're going to ultimately, just because things are so in opposition, it's probably going to be the case that the cheaper cards or the more expensive cards are going to perform better. Either the controlling elements of the cube are so strong, you put in stuff like, I don't know, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, just really powerful stuff to go over the top, and it becomes more correct to go over the top, or the efficient stuff is just stronger. That was my suspicion about the Tempo Tubert shuffling with the original recipe Tubert, is that cheap stuff is just going to win just in terms of raw efficiency, and there was enough reach, enough fast damage output that I didn't have nearly as much faith in Grave Titan as I do in Fire Blast. The sweet spot, I believe, it's not just in having 2 cubes that each have their own concept, their own macro archetype, their own theme. It's having 2 disparate concepts that overlap in some ways. It's important, I think, for the success I found with the design that Spooky Cube wasn't just graveyard matters, human matters. It's that I already had the bones for these things playing together. So when I was separating them out, it's not just, all right, here's 2 wildly different things. It's, okay, here is 2 things that on the surface maybe don't have anything in common, but there's a lot of tools there that sort of form this zipper where you zip the 2 environments together, and there's this overlap that makes them really work together harmoniously. things like humans that are discard outlets, things like humans that play really well in the sacrifice decks, things like a lot of humans that are going to be the meat, the volume for your spider spawning payoff. And then the monsters can play really well with the humans too, because when you break it down, what is going on in the human module? Human typal is a big theme, but ultimately, really, the cube is about playing on the battlefield. I'll be talking about this more next week. The humans module is about creatures on the battlefield. There is a heavy-handed aspect of the design where humans matter. Most, really all of the creatures are humans, but the gameplay is just ABC magic. I cast a creature, you cast a kill spell, we are jockeying for position on the battlefield. That's really what's happening in the games. You go over to the monster module, where the gameplay is really about managing the graveyard, going for big discard or graveyard payoffs. But there's still some stuff like Shriekmaw over in the monster module. If you just introduce Shriekmaw to the human module, it wouldn't really fit aesthetically, but in terms of the gameplay, it really naturally fits in. And then I do have things like humans as discard outlets as being a really meaningful part of the monster module. Seasoned Hollowblade, for example, just using white for both a human and a discard outlet. That's a way to make white actually contribute to a Graveyard Matters theme. But then there's a lot of humans that are either discard matters or ways to get payouts with discard. So the monster module has the madness theme, but then the humans that have a lot of discard, Jace Fringe Prodigy, for example, a new addition being Norman Osborn, I put those in the human module. They are cards that just play, but then when you shuffle them up with the fiery tempers and what have you, this new dimension opens up. So a really important aspect of the design is that the cards change in value from their 180 card environment to the full 360 card environment. There's room with these different themes, the way that I have things lined up and distributed, where cards and synergies get recontextualized as you go from 180 card cube to 360 card cube. A really nice example of this, and maybe doesn't look like anything, and if you haven't worked on it, played it, or thought about this environment, you might not give this a second thought. But I have Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector in the monster module, not in the human module. These are just strong human cards. They don't do anything in the graveyard. But the monster module is way more about synergy, so it's way more important if you're going to facilitate a sacrifice theme, if you're going to facilitate a creatures in the graveyard theme, to both have cheap creatures and creatures that just generate some kind of value. Thraben Inspector would be really strong in the human module, but it clears a hurdle for actually being playable as just an individual card that can contribute to synergies in the monster module, and then once you shuffle it up with the human module, now that human type line starts to matter. Now this is a really good card to play with Champion of the Parish. Now it's a really good card to play with Thalia's Lieutenant. And so that recontextualization, taking a human, putting it into the monster module, putting it in so it is something that you will play for value but needs to latch on to synergies, and then giving this modular environment, having these other synergies that play totally differently, and having that breakdown where it's not just, these are all the humans, these are all the monsters, making sure that there's something that teases the other environment in both of them. There's some graveyard stuff going on in the human module, there's some human stuff going on in the monster module. That allows them to really exist harmoniously when they're shuffled together. So it's not just two totally different things, it's two things that on the surface appear really different, but each is seeded with some inklings of what's going on in the other environment. And that's what allows this to be 2 cubes that actually ends up being 3 cubes. You have each 180 card environment that really leans into its own theme, while also planting the seeds for a harmonious 360 card environment that marries the 2 themes and allows them to play together. A really cool way that this breaks down is that in the humans module, there is a little bit of a spells matter theme. I mentioned Jace Vryn's Prodigy, it's a discard outlet, but then it's also a card that can flash back instants and sorceries from your graveyard, Snapcaster Mage in that environment as well. It's kind of a graveyard thing. It's mostly just a strong 2-for-1 that happens to have type line human, and then you have things like Young Pyromancer, Third Path Iconoclast, so just casting instants and sorceries is very strong. It also happens that the is it focus around madness and discard matter in the monster module is going to play reasonably with all of this stuff, right? Faithless Looting, Careful Study, these are all spells. You can just cast them. They're going to trigger Young Pyromancer. Madnessing Fiery Temper is going to trigger all of your spell matter stuff. So there's kind of a harmony that exists between these things that operate pretty differently in both of the cubes. A new addition that I really like that kind of helps highlight this and be one of those cards that teases the other environment is Electro's Bolt in the human module. I have Fiery Temper in the monster module. The reason for that, Fiery Temper is just a stronger card than Electro's Bolt. There's context, of course. Electro's Bolt deals 4 damage to a creature, but you're restricted to do it at sorcery speed. With Fiery Temper, you can do whatever. It can target any target. It can hit a player or a planeswalker. Fiery Temper, it is just a stronger card. But Electro's Bolt, it has some value in the humans module because 4 toughness creatures just being cast, that matters more there. And there's not this huge madness thing. There's a couple discard outlets, but it's something that's going to be way more relevant when you add the cubes together and you suddenly have way more discard outlets. So you kind of tease things in both directions. There's a little bit of discard matters over here. You have that one Mayhem card that's going to join all these other Madness cards. You have a couple discard outlets that are going to join with all these other discard outlets. You have a couple humans with the monsters that are going to join all these other humans and really make that human type line matter. So this design is something I spent a lot of time, put a lot of thought into. It's something that I played a ton for many years at 360 cards before I started looking at it for 180 card modules. So a lot of work went into this. There's a lot that I love about this design. I'm going to keep talking about this for the next 2 weeks. I have plenty more to say about both the human module and the monster module. But to rewind, it doesn't have to be that deep. It can just be as simple as here's 280 card cubes. We can shuffle them together if we want to play with 8. I don't want to tell you you really have to go all in. And I'll reiterate stuff like doing a cube, 180 card cube for every block in Magic's history and having the ability to shuffle them together if you're so inclined to support more players. That sounds really cool and fun to me. And you don't really have to consider the other blocks. I'm sure with those really limited card pools, when you're doing a set or a block cube, you're going to want to design that individual environment first. I'll be going over more notes in the next couple of weeks about how the human module added more humans that don't play with a graveyard at all, how the monster module added more stuff for graveyard matters, more discard outlets, how the cards did change as I focused more on the 180 card environment, and kind of what I've been talking about, my history exploring modular cubes. I do think having something independently that is playable and fun, and then having the ability to shuffle them together, that is what has worked for me. It's what has made the most sense for me. And really, the whole idea, I was talking earlier about interesting versus fun, is this maximizes fun. Spooky Cube is 2 fun cubes, a human cube and a monster cube, that can be shuffled together to play a third fun cube. So ultimately, if I want to highlight one thing today, if you're interested in a modular cube, if you want to have some cubes that you can play with the same kind of themes with a small number of players or a large number of players, and be able to separate them out because you don't really want to use a larger cube to play with a small number of players, that's the whole reason that I work on 180 card cubes, right? That's the whole reason that I developed Tuberts, is that to me it makes sense and it has played better for the card pool to scale with the number of players. And this is a way that you don't need fully 2 separate cubes to better support 2, 4, 6, 8. You have a 180 card cube or 2 that can play with 2 or 4, and then you can shuffle them together to play with 6 or 8. This is not the only way to do this. Maybe something about those 45 card modules or something about a modular cube where you don't necessarily play with the smaller components. Maybe you even just have 40 card decks or 60 card decks or commander decks that you can shuffle together and form a cube experience where you just draft those or play them independently, and that's something that speaks to you. Ultimately, your cube, your rules, can't say it enough. You got to do what speaks to you. And for that reason, when I'm doing my podcast, when I talk about my cubes, I can only talk about really what speaks to me. But hopefully I provided some good food for thought today, just conceptually about modular cubes, and also gave a little bit more insight into what makes my spooky cube, my beloved, my favorite cube, really tick. And the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be going even more in depth on that as we continue to celebrate Spooky Cube here. I'll be going over the human module next week and then the monster module to close out October here on 180 MTG. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, to like, comment, subscribe, share, everything you do to support the podcast. I appreciate you all so much, and I'll be back next week talking more Cube. Later, gamers.